Welcome to the 27th tutorial of my Tableau Server client series. This series is dedicated to showcasing how to use Tableau Server client to automate various tasks. In this video, I'll walk you through how to identify your Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance's inactive users based on a user-specified threshold, and subsequently unlicense those users surpassing the threshold. A few questions to think about on handling inactive users are: how long of a duration in days is considered inactive? Should there be a process around checking in with users based on their activity levels? And what is to be done with the freed up keys? Each organization or team will have various responses to those questions, so definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Now let's jump over to Visual Studio Code to begin developing a script that identifies inactive users and unlicenses those users on my Tableau Cloud instance. Okay, to get started, we're going to go ahead and run this initial configuration / setup block. This block is responsible for configuring our Tableau authentication and server objects. Through those two things, we're going to be able to authenticate and sign in to my Tableau Cloud instance. If you're unfamiliar with this block of code, I highly recommend you checking out tutorial 2 of my automation with Tableau Server client series. In that tutorial, I walk you through how to connect to your Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance for the first time. Now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with the main purpose of this tutorial. So the purpose of this tutorial is to show you how to identify all inactive users and create a report containing those users. And if you wish, in the end, you can unlicense those users that are deemed inactive. So what is inactive? Well, inactive could mean various things to various organizations or teams. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to pull in your user activity levels based on the user's last sign-in date. So on my Tableau Cloud instance, I have two users. They're both tied to me, different email addresses. You'll notice that one I've signed in today for the purposes of this tutorial. Another one, I have not signed in since January 1st, 2025. Now, in my organization and in probably most organizations, this would be flagged as an inactive user, whether you're doing this manually or programmatically. January 1st, 2025, that's quite a while ago, right? That's 2 months. But you may be following like a 90-day rule and they would still be considered active. Either way, what we're going to do today is I'm going to just put an arbitrary number out there for deeming somebody inactive. I'm going to say 10 days. So I'm going to say 10 days. So if any user is inactive or hasn't signed in the past 10 days, so greater than 10 days, surpassing that threshold, we're going to deem that user inactive and unlicense them. So what does unlicensing mean? It simply means setting their site's role to unlicensed. And that means that you can allocate the key that you freed up to another user. So what would you do if you were to do that manually? What would you do? You'd come to the user, you'd go site role, and you would unlicense them, right? But we want to do this programmatically, right? This is like a type of audit we'd want to perform routinely. So maybe every month we run a script that identifies inactive users and unlicense them, and then indicates how many keys we freed up. Or maybe you want to be a little bit more lax about this and you just want to generate a report that identifies inactive users and follow up with those users to ensure that they still need their license. It may be a little bit too strong of an approach to just simply unlicense them right away without following up with them. That's up to you and your organization. The purpose of this tutorial is to show you how to do it, whichever way you want to go. All right, so first thing, how are we going to identify the inactive users? Well, we're going to need to authenticate and sign into my Tableau server, or my Tableau Cloud instance in this case. So we're going to say with server.auth.signin. Pass in our Tableau authentication object that we configured above. This is going to allow me to authenticate and sign in. Now, one thing I want to note in this tutorial, I'm getting a little shaky or flaky on the idea of using this parameter, use server version, because I noticed on Tableau Server, this doesn't work incredibly well with Tableau Server client. So what I would recommend doing is not using that, especially if you're on Tableau Server, and just saying server.use highest version. This is going to allow you to ensure that you're using the most recent API version available based on the Tableau Server version or cloud instance that you're signed into. So I'm going to go ahead and do that there. And to begin, what we're going to do is, well, if we want to identify inactive users, so get this information here. So these are all stored within user objects. So that means that this is going to be very straightforward. We're going to interact or send a request to the user's endpoint to retrieve this information, which is going to come over in a nice time zone aware object. So I'm going to pull this in. Let's go ahead and do that now. So for all of our users, if we want to gather all users, we're going to say users is equal to user for user and tsc.pager server.users. So this is going to create a list of users maintained on my Tableau Cloud instance. The caveat here, the nuance here that we need to employ is that we need to somehow separate the users that are active from the inactive ones. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and create another constant here. So say is active threshold equals 10. And this is going to be used in this list comprehension here to basically filter out any users that are not inactive, right? So I want just the inactive users, and I'm going to say if the user has been active for greater than 10 days, so our threshold. The easy way to do that, if you notice at the top here, I don't typically have this in my tutorials, but I'm going to need it. So date time and time zone. I'm going to take that time zone value, and what I will do here, just to showcase exactly what I'm doing here. So I have a users list. I should have 2 users in this list, and I do. So those are the 2 that you saw on my front end, Tableau Server front end or cloud front end. What I want to do is I want to compare this last login value for each of those users to the current date and time and see if that integer value is greater than 10. If it is, then they're inactive. Otherwise, they're active. So what we're going to do is we're going to go user for user and make that comparison. Now to do that, what I need to do is I need to say if, and this, I wouldn't memorize this. I don't memorize a lot of the functions that are in the datetime module. So just do datetime now, and we're going to say timezone.utc. And then what we're going to say is minus user.lastLogin. So we're going to compare the current date and time in UTC to the user's last login value, right? So the one that I showcased here in these 2 rows. And we're going to say .days because we need that day value extracted from that timestamp. And then we're going to compare that to the 10. So in this case, I'm going to say is active threshold. All right, so user for user and tsc.pagers, and I'm missing a parentheses. And that parentheses actually needs to be around this. Datetime object has no attribute days, so I have made a mistake here. So that is going to be, there needs to be actually another parentheses here. And this actually does not need to be here. Is active threshold, so I did not run this. Okay, so there we go. And we filtered down to 1 user. So the 1 user that we have left is going to be the user that has a last login date of January 1st, 2025. That's because the difference between the current date and time at the time this was executed, so seconds ago, and the user's last login value is greater than 10 days. Okay, so we've identified our inactive users. So typically, this is going to be a lot more. So at organizations where you have hundreds or thousands of users on your server or cloud instance, you're going to have a problem with inactivity. It's just, I've never seen any organization or team not have a problem with inactivity. But some are worse than others. Some are, people are inactive for a handful of days versus a handful of months or maybe a year, over a year. So let's go ahead and continue. What are we going to do with this information? We're just going to create a data frame. I'm going to throw this information in a data frame. So the information associated with each inactive user into a data frame so that I can easily write that to an Excel file and represent this data in row column storage, right? So the thing you're most likely used to or familiar with when it comes to a report. Okay, so inactive users, let's just call this inactive users. Let's go to pd.dataframe. And then let's just pass in let's do a list of tuples. And what I'll do is for this, I'll take the list of tuples and I'm just going to extract a few common values that people are going to be looking for when it comes to user information. So for each of the users that we've extracted into this list of users that are inactive, we're going to use a tuple and we'll say user.id. So they're a LUID. That's how you would identify the user on the back end. So the locally unique identifier. Say user.fullname, user.email, user.site-role, user.last-login. And then we want to do this here. I want to actually compute the difference. So not only am I going to have their last login dates, but I'm actually going to have the difference computed. So just make the report easy to use, right? So along with their email, right? If you want to follow up or reach out to the user, questioning their activities, do they need their license still, or do they need to keep it? What have you? Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna toss that same calculation here. So I'm say datetime.now, timezone.utc, and then do the same thing, user.lastLogin, and then extract the day's value from that value. And we need, I have something wrong here. Oh yeah, I do. So for user and users. So what we've done here is we've extracted a tuple from each of the users information, where we've created a tuple containing the ID, full name, email, site role, last login, and the difference between today's date and time, whenever this is executed, and the last login value maintained for that user. Now, what I'm going to do is just to make this report friendly, I'm going to pass in a series of columns. Let's just go ahead and call the first one ID, full name, email address, site role, last login, and I'm going to say I'm going to put UTC in parentheses just so that it's clear. And then day since login, last login. Okay, so we're going to have this nice and neat report. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this, and then we'll take a look at that report, what it's going to look like before we write it to an Excel spreadsheet. So inactive users, it's going to look like this. I'm going to, of course, remove the index, so that's going to be set to false whenever we write this. But nice and neat reports. Typically, again, you're going to see more than one user on this report, especially if your threshold is 10 days. It's quite low. As you can see here, the number of days between today and the 1st of January is 70, which is quite a lot for, if you think about a license just being paid for and not being used. All right, so to continue, what we're going to do is we're going to write this, right? I'm going to write this to a file, and I think maybe the hardest part about this tutorial, besides this date time issue here, so just doing this calc if you are not familiar with these modules, so date time and time zone, well, it's going to be addressing the nuance and writing a time zone aware value to an Excel file. Unfortunately, you need to localize that to have no time zone. It needs to be not time zone aware, basically. So the easiest way to do that I know of is to just modify the column. So I'm going to say inactive users, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. Last login etc is equal to, just take this again, and we're going to say .dt. So we're going to use the datetime with pandas, and then we're going to say tz_localize. And this is going to be none. So we're going to have no time zone. And that's going to allow us to actually write this data frame to Excel. If you don't have it localized, so you have no time zone, you don't strip the time zone aware, then you're going to get an error. All right, so let's go ahead and write this to an Excel file. So I'm going to say inactive users .to Excel. Then what am I going to do? I'm going to write this to the directory dedicated to this tutorial. So let me go ahead and copy and paste that directory. Let's do Excel writer is equal to, let's do a raw string, pass that in, and I'll call this inactive users, and it's going to be an Excel file. We're good there. And then index is equal to false. And I need to put that comma. Okay. So after executing this, we're going to see that an Excel file was written that contains this one row of data indicating that there's one inactive user based on our threshold of 10 days. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and let me open up that file. All right, so I have that file here. So inactive users is the file we just wrote. And let me just expand these columns. And it looks just as it was represented in Visual Studio Code, right, as expected. So we have the LUID, so how the unique identifier associated with the user object. We have the email address, the site role, last login, and the day since login, which is 70. Okay, so depending on your organization and team, you may or may not want to just unlicense these people right away. But what I'm going to show you right now is I'm going to show you how to do it if you choose to do that. If you choose to take a strong stance, or you just ultimately, you reach out to the user and they say, hey, I don't need my license anymore. Well, this is how you would unlicense them. And this is luckily a very short and sweet operation to do. What we're going to do is we're going to iterate through these users that we retrieved, right? So we know for a fact that every user in this list is inactive. And this list contains it contains basically user objects, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for user and users, I'm going to say user.siteRole. So I'm going to iterate through the users. and I'm going to change their site role attributes. And I'm going to say, let's set that equal to unlicensed. And then what I'll do is I'll say, so we haven't done anything yet here, right? So I've actually, if you just run this now, you've only set that object on your machine to have an attribute value of site role equal to unlicensed. You haven't actually done anything on your cloud instance or server if you just run this and don't take this next step. So the next step to actually seal this person's fate as an unlicensed user, you're going to say server.users. So you're going to use the user's endpoint, and you're going to say update. So we're going to use the update method, and we're going to basically pass back in this user item. So user item is equal to user. And what this is doing is it's just changing this value, right? So of the attributes, these are attributes site role. And if we go, before I run this, what I want to do is I just want to run back here, and you'll notice that the site role is explorer can publish. As soon as I run this user is going to be unlicensed. Let's see, what do I have? Oh, I need to close this file. Let's close this file, basically saying I have a file open that I'm trying to write to. Okay, so it ran successfully. Now let's go navigate back to my cloud instance, and we're going to see that this should update to unlicensed as soon as I hit refresh. And it did. There you have it. So what we've done, let me just recap what we've done today in this tutorial. So we authenticated and signed in with my Tableau Cloud instance, completely normal. We do that every tutorial. What we don't do every tutorial is set a threshold for inactivity. We use that threshold to compare the duration between the user's last login, which is maintained for every user. So if you go back to the server or your cloud instance, the last login value is maintained for every user. We compared that to the current date and time for which this code was executed. And if it was greater than 10, then we called those inactive users. So basically created a data frame called inactive users, did some transformations, very minor. So added some columns for report-friendly column names, and then wrote that to a file. So that's your report. Again, the report could come in handy if you just simply want to reach out to these users to give them a nudge, hey, user license, we're going to take it away. But if you ultimately end up wanting to unlicense those users, well, you can do that programmatically, right? Especially if it's more than one person. If you want to, have this script run in the background, like on whatever frequency, this would come in handy, right? So, you generate a report and then log that report and then unlicense them, right? Programmatically just running in the background. So we went ahead and set their site role to unlicensed and then ran the update method at the user's endpoint, which is ultimately going to unlicense those users. Okay. I've talked a lot. One last thing I will mention before I end this tutorial is that if you want the code that I've highlighted today throughout this tutorial, I have a nearly ready to go set of code here or script here that's going to allow you to just basically copy and paste this and make some minor adjustments. So some of those adjustments are going to be obviously your token name. So just your authentication, right? So your token name, token value, your site ID is definitely not going to be mine. Your server is most likely not going to be mine unless you're connecting to a developer instance too. You might want to axe this if you're on Tableau Server and do what I indicated today in this tutorial, which is use highest version, right? So going back to that very quickly, that's going to be this here, right? And so instead of passing in an argument or value for use server version, just use server.use highest version to ensure that you're able to use the most recent API compatible with your server or cloud instances version. Okay, but the code's here. So everything's here. The whole writing to an Excel to generate the report and then the unlicensing, it's all here. As are probably 30 other or so scripts that are dedicated to specific topics. All right. Well, that wraps up this video on identifying inactive users and unlicensing those users programmatically through Tableau Server clients. I hope you found this tutorial useful and can use the concepts I've covered to level up your ability to manage your own Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance through automation. If you enjoyed this video, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel for notifications on future videos. Thank you again, and see you next time.